All right, let's take our Bibles tonight. Turn to the book of Ruth, chapter number 2. I think I broke it again. Ruth, chapter number 2, verse number 17 is where we're going to start reading. I'm not going to start off reading like I normally do. We're going to cover all of the verses in the passage. But as you're turning there, I want you to realize this. When the whole book is dealing with the matter of love, and I don't know of anything that is more misunderstood, and you can tell how people don't understand by how many experts we have on it. When it comes to the topic of love, I mean everybody thinks that they know everything there is about it. And in this passage, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at it from God's vantage point. And I think that you're going to find there's a lot of things as far as how God is describing love, and it does not add up with how the world looks at it at all. And unfortunately, most people are looking at love from a worldly vantage point. I want to bring a message tonight on the subject, the look of love. What does it look like? This passage is going to describe that. There's a story that originated in India about 6 blind men who were all friends, and they heard that an elephant had been brought to town. And they started talking among themselves, trying to figure out, boy, I wonder what an elephant looks like. And so they decided to send one of the guys down there, and this guy was going to go down, scope out the elephant, come back with a report, and tell everybody what an elephant was like. And so this first guy, here's where the elephant's at, gets somebody to guide him down there, and he walks up to the elephant, grabs hold of it, and he grabs one of his gigantic ears. And he said, so this is what an elephant is like. And he goes back to his friends and says, you guys won't believe this. Man, I'd have never thought this in a million years. An elephant is like a fan. And he said, a fan? And he said, yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. Great big old fan. And they're talking about it amongst themselves and saying, well, how could any animal look like a fan? And so they started arguing about whether or not that was a really accurate description. So they sent a second blind guy down to the elephant. Next guy shows up and finds out where the elephant is. He walks into the elephant until he bumps into it and grabs a big old leg, and he says, wow, an elephant is like a tree. Goes back to the other guys and says, hey guys, that first guy, man, he was out to lunch. I don't know where this fan business came from, but I'm telling you right now, I felt the elephant with my own 2 hands. An elephant is like a tree. Well, that started an argument with the first guy. And so they're squabbling around trying to get this thing figured out. So they sent a third guy down, and he made it to the elephant, walked over the elephant, put his hands out, touched the side of the elephant, and said to himself, wow, this elephant, it's more like a wall than anything else. Goes back, tells his buddies, man, these 2 guys, I don't know what's going on, but an elephant's exactly like a wall. The argument gets even worse. They sent the next guy down. He grabbed hold of the tusk, came back and told everybody an elephant is exactly like a great big old spear. Next guy goes down, grabs hold of the trunk of the elephant, comes back and says, no, these guys are all wrong. An elephant is just like a snake. I could feel that thing moving around, slithering around just like a snake. They sent a 6th guy down to find out what it was all about. He grabbed hold of the tail, came back and said, fellas, you're all wrong. An elephant is just like a rope. Now, there's one big problem with this scenario, and that is they were all right, and they were all wrong. And the truth of the matter is they were more wrong than they were right. And I'd say that that's pretty much how the world lines up with their view of love. They may have one little thing that's right, and they got a whole lot of wrong in their idea of what love is all about. How is it that there can be so many experts on love. I mean, you can talk to anybody and it seems like everybody's got an opinion. One person is unhappily married to a grouch. And because of what they don't have, they think they're an expert on love. A friend at work is in a live-in situation with somebody. And so they think they're an expert on love. Another person's been divorced, and because of all the heartaches they've been through, they think that they're an expert on it. And while everybody has an opinion on it, most people are like these blind men. They have a personal experience that gave them a little bit of insight, but they're lacking the big picture. And God is in the big picture business. And that's why He's given us a lot of things, especially in this book, that are supposed to help us to get a good grasp on what the right kind of love is all about. Verse number 17, if you'll circle the word ephah as we come to it, the first description of love as portrayed in the Bible, in this passage, love is generous. So she gleaned in the field until even, or that evening, and beat out that she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. So where are we getting this picture of love from? Now, I think that it's important that you consider the source. Just because you hear something that sounds right, the question is, where'd you get it from? We're being presented here a picture of love, but where's this coming from? It did not come from Naomi, because she's not even aware of what's taken place yet. This fact did not come from Ruth, because she had never gleaned in a field before. She didn't know what to expect. An ephah of barley, is that good or bad? Where did this generosity that I'm pointing to, where did that come from? This ephah of barley. It came from Boaz, for he was the owner of the field and he was the employer of these workers. And it was his decision alone that made for a very generous portion of grain to be granted to Ruth. Well, how generous was he? An ephah of barley was equal to about a week's worth of groceries. They didn't have refrigerators or Tupperware containers back then, and therefore storing food was kind of a major issue. And so giving to Ruth this much food was a very kind gesture, but it was not so much as to create a problem of storing it. And so the first description of what love is like is this: it is practical in its generosity, but not to a fault. When a young couple fall in love, they decide to get married, they usually do two things that I think are foolish. The first one is they waste way too much money on wedding rings. I don't care how many Zales jeweler commercials you see on TV. I don't care how much the sale is down at the jewelry store. Most people getting married spend far too much money on wedding rings than they ought to. As far as I'm concerned, they'd be better off buying cheaper rings and get a reliable car. Because I'm telling you one thing, when the wife breaks down in the old jalopy, doesn't matter how big that diamond is on her finger, driving an unreliable car is going to get that husband into a lot of hot water. And that ring ain't going to do any good when the car breaks down. Love is not about being extravagant. It's about being generous, but practical. Secondly, couples waste too much money on weddings. They need to save the money for a down payment on a house, or they need to use the money to buy nicer furniture that both of them can enjoy for years to come. But why throw money away on flowers and decorations and food? Love should be based on what we find in the Bible, not on wedding websites that are based on ways of the world. Verse number 18. Second thing tonight, love is noticeable. And she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. And she brought forth and gave to her that she had reserved after she was sufficed or satisfied. When Boaz was generous to Ruth, his generosity was in plain sight for Naomi to see. Ruth brought it home. Naomi saw it with her own two eyes. There was nothing secretive about it. There was no attempt to hide anything because there was nothing to be ashamed of. If you have to hide a relationship, then it's probably not the right kind of relationship to be having. Boaz was being nice to Ruth, and I'm sure that all of his workers knew that, wow, he's given her a really big portion. They saw his kindness. There was nothing secretive about it. And Boaz was not trying to hide anything because he hadn't done anything wrong. Now, having said that, let me also warn about going to the other extreme and deliberately trying to put on a show of public affection that is hypocrisy. From 30 years of pastoring and from 47 years of marriage, I can say that when I see public displays of affection, it is usually always pointing to marital problems in the home. I have seen it, I don't know how many times. When a married couple is going out of their way to in public and oochie goochie goochie, what they're admitting is, we got to do this in public because we ain't done it at home. When somebody is going to this extreme and trying to show the world of how lovey-dovey they are, they're not. Take it for what it's worth, but I know what I'm talking about. It's called overcompensating. It's trying to sell something that you don't have. It's trying to convince people that all is well when it's not. Years ago, we had Dr. Lee Robertson and his wife here for a conference. After the preaching time, we had a bunch of preachers that stayed behind for a meal. They had their wives with them. After the meal was over with, all of the ladies, we took them out and sent them shopping. And while the ladies were out shopping, we had the preachers stay behind for a question and answer session. And so these pastors are asking Dr. Robertson questions about the ministry and what would you do in this situation and how do you do this, how do you do that. And after a while, the preachers were done. And the ladies were supposed to be back, I don't know, what time, 2 o'clock maybe? And it was about 1:30 when the fellows were wrapped up, and we were just sitting there, and everybody was just kind of chit-chatting, and Dr. Robertson said, "Preacher, can you take me back to the motel?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I sure can." And I said, "The ladies are not going to be back till for another 30 minutes." And he said, "Well, that's okay. She'll find a ride." Talking about his wife. She'll find a ride. I laughed inwardly. I took him back to the motel, and I'm thinking, wow, he's pretty safe and secure in his marriage. Not trying to impress anybody. And here's the amazing thing. He was right. His wife did find a ride back. My wife took her back, and she enjoyed that. When you have a good, solid marriage, you don't have to put on the dog. You don't have to try to convince somebody of how wonderful it is. When it's good, it's good. You don't have to try to pretend and make it look like what it's not. Verse 19. Third thing about love tonight is this. Love is informed. Verse 19. And her mother-in-law said unto her, Where hast thou gleaned today, and where wroughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee. And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, The man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. As soon as Naomi saw her daughter-in-law walk through the door with both arms carrying these groceries, she knew that something unusual had just taken place. Somebody noticed Ruth. Naomi knew all about gleaning the fields. Naomi was hoping that she showed up with enough food for at least they could put together a meal for dinner that night. But when she showed up with a week's worth of groceries, Naomi knew somebody noticed my pretty daughter-in-law. So why did Boaz load Ruth down with a lot more grain than he would have given anybody else? The reason was because he had already heard about this woman. Boaz already knew that she had been faithful to her husband, married for 10 years and was now a widow. Boaz had already heard that she was taking care of Naomi and had voluntarily returned with her when it would have been a whole lot easier to stay in Moab. And then the icing on the cake was that Ruth had made the decision to accept Jehovah God, and she chose to convert to being a Jew. Boaz had already heard enough about Ruth so that when he finally met her in person, he already loved her character before he fell in love with her as an individual. They say that love is blind. It certainly can be to a degree. But love is not supposed to be ignorant. And for love to grow, there must be information and a desire to be educated. Love does not assume. It studies. It investigates. It asks questions. I've heard of people getting married only to discover, after the fact, that their spouse had been in prison for a couple of years. One woman found out too late that she had married a homosexual. Do you know what happens when you buy a car that gets terrible gas mileage or it's a lemon? The bad news is you're very frustrated about it. But the good news is you can always get rid of it and get another one. It's not the end of the world. But getting married is not the same as buying a car. Cars can come and go. A person can even develop a hobby of buying and selling and fixing them if they want to. Marriage is not a hobby. You don't marry somebody with the idea that you'll change the part of them that you don't like. And you don't marry somebody with the idea that if things don't work out, you'll just trade them in for a newer model. Marriage is supposed to be a lifetime commitment, which means that before you say I do, you'd better do your homework. But what about those who are already married? Education is supposed to be taking place for a lifetime. And that means that there should always be an attempt to find out how to make a good marriage even better. Verse 19 again. Love is an adventure. And her mother-in-law said unto her, Where hast thou gleaned today? And where wroughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee. And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, The man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. When Naomi heard the name of Boaz, that is when the light came on. This was not an ordinary, typical day that they were experiencing. This was something special. Why was that? Because Naomi knew Boaz. Naomi knew that Boaz just happened to be single. She knew that he also happened to be rich. And she also knew that Boaz was a man of godly character. And she also knew that she was related to him. And for the first time in a long time, Naomi felt as if God might be doing something that had the potential to be wonderful. Do you know what's exciting about an adventure? You know it's going to be good, but you just don't know yet what's going to happen. Now, there's always a scary side to it because it has the potential to backfire or disappoint. But the good outweighs the bad. And that's why people look forward to an adventure. And so when Naomi heard the name of Boaz, and he was the one that noticed Ruth, and he was the one that gave her all these groceries, she thought to herself, whoopee! God is doing something. Man, I dreaded coming back home. Oh, how I hated to see her come back with me. But of all people for Ruth to meet, of all the men that noticed her, what do you know? It looks like we may have an adventure coming up. And what made it even more exciting was the fact that for the first time in a long time, Naomi was starting to see God's hand moving in mysterious ways. Verse number 20. Love is a duty. And this is a huge departure from what the world sees and how the world thinks. Verse 20, And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said unto her, The man is near of kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen. One of the surest signs that a person is clueless as to what love really is when they are heard to say, we fell out of love. And that's what you hear all the time. Love is a duty that is performed regardless of how a person feels. To fall out of love is just another way of saying, I chose to quit loving that person. If you have a job, it is your duty to go to work. If you have a mortgage, it's your duty to pay that mortgage every month. If you have a car, it's your duty to have insurance on it and to keep it safe. Now, do you have to do those things? No, actually, you don't have to go to work. You can stay home and just get fired. Do you have to pay your mortgage? No, you don't have to pay your mortgage. You could probably live there for, 3-4 months before they repossess it and you become homeless. You don't have to have insurance on your car, and you don't have to take care of it. But there are people in prison tonight because they did not have insurance, or because they were driving a car and they knew it was unsafe and they were involved in a wreck and they killed somebody. A duty is an obligation that is performed out of character. In Israel, God made a provision for His people that would help them financially. And that provision was called the law of the kinsman redeemer. If a married man died without having children, it was God's intent for the man's brother to marry the wife who was now a widow. The purpose was so that she could have children who would grow up and take care of mom in her old age. That was God's idea. But preacher, what about love? It wasn't about love. It was about taking care of a widow that was in need. There was an obligation and a duty. And in order to help take care of the brother's family, a marriage was to take place. Boaz was in the position of being the kinsman redeemer in relation to Ruth. And what that meant was that legally there was the possibility that Boaz might be responsible for marrying Ruth so that she could have children who would be able to take care of her in her old age. Verse 21, number 6 tonight, love is restrictive. And Ruth the Moabitess said, He said unto me also, Thou shalt keep fast by my young men until they have ended all my harvest. And Naomi said unto Ruth her daughter-in-law, It is good, my daughter, that thou go out with his maidens, that they meet thee not in any other field. The more that love grows, the more restrictive it becomes. Boaz noticed Ruth. He chose to be generous and good to her by allowing her to gather a lot more grain than a person would normally have been allowed to gather. And while Ruth was not aware of it, Boaz already knew that about the law of the kinsman redeemer. He already knew that there was a slight possibility that there could be a marriage involved. Ruth didn't know that, but he did. And so Boaz gave to Ruth a piece of advice that she understood what she was supposed to do, though she did not fully grasp why. She needed to remain with his workers in his field. Now, from her vantage point, maybe that was going to add up to where she was going to be getting more food if she would stay in his field. But from his vantage point, he wanted to keep her safe because he felt a responsibility for her. I really try not to do this very often. But once in a while, when I'm talking to somebody and I really, really am concerned that they're going to make a mistake that they're going to regret, I will ask them if I can stick my nose in their business. I have done this probably maybe, and I'm guessing on the high side, I've probably done this maybe 6 times in 30 years. I don't do it very often. I will then tell them what I see, what I fear, and what I recommend. I don't do it very often because it's not my business. I prefer that people ask. And if they ask, I'll share some things with them. It's when they don't ask that I'm praying to God that they will. The reason that I don't do it very often is I don't want to hurt them, number one. And number two, if they don't ask, it's not my business. But when I think that it will help them, I will interfere with their permission. And the reason is because I feel responsible for them. Ruth did not have to listen to Boaz. She could have gone someplace else, and who knows, she may have met another worker in another field and gotten married. But by choosing to honor the wishes of Boaz, she also chose to restrict herself by giving love a chance. Verse number 23. Last thing tonight is this: love is loyal. So she kept fast by the maidens of Boaz to glean unto the end of barley harvest and of wheat harvest, and dwelt with her mother-in-law. Circle the word dwelt in that verse there. Things for Ruth are starting to turn around. There's a rich man that likes her. And not only that, he's in a position to possibly even marry her. She has every reason in the world to think that her life has just made a great turn for the good. But with all of these promising things now on the horizon, Ruth is seen doing something that's very, very important. And that is, she's dwelling with Naomi. The word dwelt carries with it the idea that it was a permanent arrangement. Ruth is not going to drop Naomi just because she found somebody else. Naomi is now like her own mother. And no matter what might happen, Ruth had already committed herself to taking care of Naomi, and whoever might end up marrying Ruth, they're going to be getting a package deal. Because Ruth made the decision back in Moab, my God is going to be, or your God is going to be my God, and I'm sticking with you no matter what. Folks, this was a time there was no Social Security. They didn't have IRAs. The financial future of Naomi was worse than bleak. And Ruth, even though things are turning around in her life, Ruth is letting her mother-in-law know, I'm going to help you. You helped me, I'm going to help you. I'm going to look after you. You were a blessing to me to bring me back. I'm going to continue to be a blessing to you. Now that might have been viewed as a bad thing to some men who were available, but there's always a silver lining to every cloud. And the silver lining was this: if Ruth was willing to be that loyal to her mother-in-law, just think how loyal she would be to a husband. Love doesn't cut corners. Love doesn't defraud. Love can stand on its own 2 feet. And love is loyal. Let's bow for prayer. Father, we're asking for your blessings to be upon each and every person tonight. And Holy Spirit, I pray that you would allow us to see beyond Ruth so that we can see ourselves. Lord, help us to be able to see beyond Boaz and help us to see Jesus Christ himself. And as he has pledged his love to us, I pray that you'd help us to give to him the same loyalty that he's given to us. Our heads are bowed and our eyes are closed.